Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Placer County Planning Commission for this November 13th day. We're going to start out with the flag salute. And Ken, can you lead us in that?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Kathy, do you want to do a roll call, please?
Mr. Gray? Here. Mr. Nader? Here. Mr. Moss?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Rakucci? Here. Mr. Denayo?
Here.
Mr. Sevison?
Here. Is that 7? Yeah. Holy Toledo, we haven't had a full house in a while. This is an opportunity right now for anyone that would care to address the Planning Commission on items.
Give it to EJ first. He gets to address it.
Oh, I apologize. No, you have precedence. I'm sorry.
Good morning. I'm E.J. Avaldi with the Planning Services Division. I'll be real quick. At the November 4th Board of Supervisors meeting, they considered the Sheridan Community Plan update finally. They did take action to approve the plan. There was one change, and that was related to the, I believe it was a 33-acre parcel that was being changed from industrial to a farm zoning. That they recommended that be changed to a farm 10-acre minimum zoning, which that would actually allow them to split, I believe, into 3 parcels. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to go back to the board on November 18th, and that will be the final consideration of that plan update. For Planning Commission, as you all know, we scheduled a special Planning Commission meeting for next week on the 20th. On that agenda, we're going to be asking you to consider the Placer Vineyards specific plan amendment and also the Riolo Vineyards specific plan amendment. You should be getting packets. They're getting sent out today, so you have those to review over the next week.
EJ, time of meeting?
It will be 10 o'clock. First item starting at 10:05. Then on December 11th, that will be the next meeting after that. We do have a couple items. We have a residential care facility that is an appeal from the zoning administrator. And then there's also Cambridge Estates, which is requesting a gated entry. And so we have those 2 items for December. That's all I have. Any questions?
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy, any chance I could take my packet with me when I go today? Can I get my packet to take with me today? Not quite ready? Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's all right. I just thought maybe by chance. Oh, no, don't bother. I'll be going home before anyways. For TRPA, so I can look at it then. Okay. We now have public comment. Is there anyone that would care to address the commission on items not on the agenda today? Seeing no one come forward, then we'll move on to our first item, which is a workshop and proposed update to the county winery ordinance and discussion of updates to temporary uses and events section of the zoning ordinance. And I believe Mr. Rosasco is going to lead the charge on this.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Sevison. As you know, my name is George Rosasco. I'm a supervising planner with Placer County Planning. And this is our 4th workshop on the wine rezoning text amendment, or as it's referred to as the update. Excuse me, on the backside of a cold. With your staff report, there's an attached proposed ordinance. As you recall from the last workshop, you asked us to go out to the MACs and solicit comments from the public in the MACs. And not surprisingly, the The issues that came up over and over are the exact same issues that came up during the event center ordinance, specifically with regard to agricultural event centers. People are concerned about the event numbers that might take place at a winery. They're concerned about the access issues that may be involved with wineries. They're concerned about the tasting room regulations, and they are concerned about us being able to enforce any new ordinances that we put into place. So what I did to address those, because these are all exactly similar to the event center ordinance, specifically with agricultural event centers, I simply lifted the language from what was approved as part of the event center ordinance and placed it in the winery ordinance. We have added one section, which is a boutique winery, which is, if my memory serves me right, 2,500 cases or less. So what a boutique winery would be able to do is, if they make less than 2,500 cases, which is a lot of the wineries in the county right now, they don't necessarily need to invest a lot in a tasting room and bathrooms and ADA compliance. What we have decided that we would allow them to do is put up sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, like a bar you would see on a beach, less than 120 square feet, open on two sides where people could come up and have tasting. Wouldn't require a bathroom, wouldn't require anything like that. So it would be a way to encourage small wineries. They wouldn't be allowed events. They would be allowed temporary outdoor events, just like anyone else in the county would be allowed to apply for a temporary outdoor event. The other thing that is moving forward with the winery ordinance, which is sort of on a side and parallel track, is that we are asking that the temporary outdoor event permit section of the ordinance be changed to allow 6 days worth of events, not just 2 events, which could be 3 days each. So with that, is there any questions? Because I brought comparisons of the 4 issues that I just discussed.
Any questions?
Anything?
None? Oh, Richard?
So, for a winery, we passed a community center, a community center was passed by the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, an event center ordinance,
And
yes.
so, would wineries, at some point in time, reach a certain level that they're going to need to apply for a community center zoning, or what's the breakoff point there between wineries and community centers?
Essentially, the way this existing winery ordinance is written, because we now know what the board's policy is with regard to agricultural event centers, is that really the only difference with the winery ordinance is that wineries can start at 4.6 acres, and it's what a winery can do up until they get to the agricultural event center. So if you're a winery and you want to do the things, for instance, that an agricultural event center would do as provided in the event center ordinance, then you become subject to that ordinance. So you have things that you can do as a winery, but when you cross beyond that and you go into what would be construed as an agricultural event center, then you become subject to that.
What's the break point there?
The real break point is wineries can be on parcels as small as 4.6 acres. Okay. Agricultural event centers start at 10 acres. So there's really room for discussion about what wineries can do between 4.6 acres and 10. At least in my mind. And if you have a different thought, you should share that with me. But that's the way I see it, since we just adopted an event center ordinance, which clearly puts down the Board of Supervisors' expectations about how they want events to be done in agricultural zone districts.
So it's just the acreage is the difference? I guess maybe I didn't follow that.
Well, what I was saying is wineries can start at 4.6 acres. Agricultural event centers start at 10 acres. Okay? So you have to discuss in general what a winery is allowed to do, and specifically you have to be able to address that gap of 4.6 to 10. For instance, this ordinance provides for the ability to get if it goes as proposed, an administrative review permit for 6 events, then you could apply for TOEs, temporary outdoor events, for another 6. So as a winery, you could have 12 events if you go through that process. If you want to go beyond that, then you'd need to start meeting the requirements as an agricultural event center.
And they'd have to have 10 acres in
Then they have to have 10 acres,
and meet the income.
meet the income requirement, yes.
Missy, another question is, at our last meeting, there was a discussion about the proportion of the property, be it 4.6 acres or more, that is growing grapes.
Right.
Have we changed that, or where's that at?
We have not. The only thing that's changed with regard to the winery ordinance at this point is that you are required to have an acre of grapes, and there's no longer the ability of the Ag Commissioner to make a functional equivalency determination. However, I think if we go forward and we go to the Ag Commissioner, and when we go out to the max as an action item, when this comes back to you, there may be a recommendation to change that number to more grapes, less grapes. I'm not sure at this point. My sense is, I've gone to the Agricultural Commission a few times. My sense is that they're of the opinion that it should be a percentage of the site, not a flat number. So that's something relatively easy to do. If that's the consensus when we come back, we would propose that to you.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Yep. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Yeah, George, since enforcement seems to be a kind of a hot issue through
Yeah.
both the event center and this,
Right.
and you kind of come up with a way of addressing that.
Right.
Just wanted to ask, how's the progress of that coming along?
Progress is good. I extended an offer to a third code enforcement officer yesterday, which they accepted. They're coming on board with the understanding that they will be working possibly alternative work schedules. Right now, what we're going to do is we have 3 full-time officers now. We're going to make officers available on the weekends on an on-call basis to address the issues. If that is not adequate, then we will actually have an officer who works an alternative work schedule, might like work from 12 to 8. We have also, with regard to wineries, we've also what we call the task force. We went out and visited wineries that would allow us on the property. We gave them the option of not letting us, if you want us to come and talk to you about what you can and can't do and see if there's any issues. Some of them had some issues, and we're going to issue letters to all of them saying, look, this is what we saw when we were out there. Please come in and talk to us and see what we can do to fix it.
Something else that you talked about is having postings on these properties that want to have events, whether, again, they're event centers or wineries, where there would be a number that they could call, not just at that location, but also if they can't get a response at that location, that they could call somebody at the county, that they will actually get somebody to answer the phone.
Right.
So is there going to be like a cell phone or something that's going to be passed between those 3 officers so that somebody is available to answer during those sort of...
Yeah, we're going to have like
period?
a hotline, which will be the same number all the time, that will be available for people to call.
So the posting is something you're still kind of proposing to do?
The posting, I don't actually have a requirement for posting in here, but clearly that's something that very easily we could do.
Yeah,
Posting on a winery with numbers.
sure.
Yeah.
It's up to, obviously, the rest of the planning
Yeah.
commission, but it's something I would really suggest, because then it makes it really available for anybody who has an issue.
Sure.
Because they may not always get a response from the owner of the property.
Right.
It was suggested by some of the other commissioners that maybe your cell phone number would be...
No, I don't think so. Thank you, George.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Just one
Ken?
quick one, George. I know the roads were a big issue on this, and you said that they crossed over with some of the event centers. Did they pick up on the road issues from that?
You mean, does the winery ordinance picks up? Yeah. Matter of fact, what I did is the language that was put into for agricultural event centers, which requires if you're on a private road, that you need a 2/3 majority of the people for it to go ahead as a winery. I put that into the winery ordinance. The only exception to that is because boutique wineries, if you wanted to be a boutique wineries, aren't allowed events, and they really don't have like a tasting room per se, they would not be subject to that two-thirds majority of the private road owners.
Okay.
Okay?
Maybe one more question that just came up. So the boutique wineries, if they wanted to have an event, they could apply to the temporary event program?
Just like anyone else, just like you could, just like I could.
Okay.
We have a temporary outdoor event section in our ordinance, which allows anyone to apply for temporary outdoor event. So they would still be allowed to do that.
Is that part of the winery ordinance, or is it going to be a separate
The
ordinance?
temporary outdoor event ordinance is a separate section of the zoning ordinance. The only reason it's coming forward is because it's come up a number of times that instead of allowing 2 3-day events, that it would be better served a lot of the people and wineries to be allowed to have like 6 one-day events. So it's the same amount of days, it's just a number of events that may or may not change.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, anyone else have a question? Okay, thank you.
So quickly, let me go over this really quick. I have the four hot button items. So, the first one is event. This is the exact same language that was approved by the board for agricultural event centers. Basically, it says if you have 20 people or more who are gathered for an event, that it's construed to be an event. Less than 20, it's not an event. If you have more people on your winery, and this always comes up, if you happen to be very popular and 30 people show up for a wine tasting at one time, that's not an event because you don't have 30 people there to have a social gathering. You have 30 people dropping in to drink some wine and taste it and leave. So that's not an event. It has to be like the Rotary Club coming to have a meeting or something like that with more than 20 people to be an event. So what they have right now is what's called a promotional event. You can only have events that promote your winery. Virtually no other jurisdiction that I looked at actually has the provision that it be a promotional event. So the proposal is just to leave that out, that you can have just events, whatever they may be. I think most vintners and winery owners would tell you simply having people on their winery for an event is promoting their product. Whether they pair it with food or wine or that sort of thing, just having them there is good for their business. So that's the proposal, same as in the community center or event center ordinance. This was also a topic of contention. Our existing ordinance says public tasting refers to wine sampling by the general public. No definition of what sampling is. Traditionally, it's been a 1 ounce pour. What's proposed in the new ordinance, that tasting be allowed in accordance with California state law, which allows for on-site sale of beer and wine, not beer, but wine by the bottle and by the glass for on-site consumption. Every jurisdiction that I talk to basically refers back to the state. We do have the ability to be more restrictive. We just have not had an ordinance. I did not find any ordinance that does that. Access standards. This is the one that I was telling you about. This is exactly from the event center ordinance, the 2/3 vote of the property owners, unless you're a boutique winery. And this is the existing, just says access roads to winery structures, to wineries basically shall meet state and local fire standards. There's no requirement other than they may have to upgrade a private road. Boutique winery refers to a winery with an annual production of less than 2,500 cases. Then it talks about the 120 square foot tasting area, and no events other than temporary outdoor events are allowed at a boutique winery. I should say, and the ordinance isn't clear on this, but it did come up, that even if you do make less than 2,500 cases, you could also be construed to be a small winery if you chose to go that route, so that if you wanted to have events and you wanted to take care of the private access, because you make less than 2,500, you're not excluded from going to the next step. This is just the language about the temporary outdoor events, changing it from 2-3 days to 6 days worth of events. And this is how I see us moving forward. After today, I am anticipating that I will be able to go to the max with an ordinance which is substantially what you're comfortable with for an action item. Then we'll prepare the environmental document in December. We will start going to the MACs, Municipal Area Councils, Municipal Advisory Council, excuse me, in December and January. Back here in February for your final recommendation to the board in March of 2015. Any other questions, gentlemen?
Any questions?
I do.
Yes.
George, just on the road access, the 2/3 vote.
Yeah.
Is that one time or per event?
No, that would be, for instance, if you're on a private road and you're a winery, that would be a one-time. You would come in with a signed agreement and that sort of thing. And people, 2/3 of the people would have to agree that you can do this on their private road. So it would be a one-time issue.
So if somebody sold the house who had voted, the new person wouldn't have anything to say, they just know that that was going to be allowed?
I would think that if you had a winery and you had signed an agreement that said, we agree to have a winery that's going to have events, that would be something that would come under disclosure laws.
Yeah.
That you would need to disclose that.
So would it be recorded?
Haven't really thought about that. I don't know if that's a recordable document or not. We would have to talk to the recorder's office. If we could record it, that would be a good
Just
thing.
become part of their road easement or something like that?
That would be something we could look into.
In actuality, this particular process would anticipate that this agreement come in at the time of application submittal, and that would not be something that would be recorded. Obviously, if there was any discretionary permit for the winery, that would run with the land and be there. So no, chances are we would not record it.
Okay. If there's nothing else, George, I will see if there's anyone from the public that would care to comment briefly on the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone who would care to come address the commission on the winery issue? Give us your name and
Good morning, gentlemen. Lori Lewis, Wise Road, Newcastle. I feel like the canary in the coal mine. You all know that I have a winery 900 feet from my home, and I have an event center probably 2,000 feet from my home. Last Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago, the winery had an event, a fundraiser for a bicycle race that started at 7 in the morning. Whether they pulled an outdoor permit for that or promotional, I didn't even follow up on that. That event started at 7 in the morning and ended at 5. That was at the winery, and there was a whole bunch of bicyclists. 5 o'clock, Gold Hill Gardens has a wedding now from 5 until 10 p.m. I had it on both sides of me. Where is the county protecting my right to the agricultural zoning when, and I've had neighbors come to my house, they haven't filed a formal complaint yet, but the Gold Hill Garden sounds like a football stadium. It sounds like there's a football game going on because the events that he's having is being held outside, and that's being carried for miles. So I'm the canary in the mine, and the county has really, this last proposal, I'm really pleased to see all the accommodations on our side, but take a broad look at the event centers and wineries because they're going to be right next door to other people that it impacts. So, thank you, gentlemen.
thank you. Anyone else?
Morning, I'm Susan Ames. I'm on the corner of Wise and Gold Hill, just one property in a street over from Lori. So I have the same issues and the same complaints. But I have a couple questions. One is, when you talk about an acre of grapes, how many plants does that constitute? And same with the hops for the breweries. does 5 plants on an acre constitute planting an acre of grapes? There needs to be there's an average if you do some investigating of how many plants usually they'll plant for an acre. So I think we need to set a number of plants rather than a number of acres, to be clear. The second thing is, Lori addressed this too, every Saturday night, all summer long, Gold Hill Gardens had an event. And it was so loud that I actually had to take my dogs in because they've got amplified PA announcements, and then the crowd would cheer, and people would be leaving and honking their horns at 11:30 sometimes. I called several times to complain and left a message on their answering machine and got no response, no action on it, nothing. So I really need to stress that we do need to have a number posted so that people have some kind of a recourse, because it's very, very invasive. I could hear the music when I was in my pasture locking up my animals every Saturday night. And that's only going to get worse. And the other thing is, speaking of posting things, and I know Carol has brought up with George the idea of limiting the amount of wine or beer consumed at the tasting rooms or whatever. It can't be unlimited. You're putting the winery owner in a position where they have to cut it off, which is against their whole plan, which is to make more money off their wines. I think they need to have a limit set, and I think that also needs to be posted at the site with a number so that if someone sees someone going over the limit, there's somewhere else they can complain to besides the winery owner. That's kind of a sticky situation. And the reason that I mention that is, I don't know if you remember, but last summer I mentioned that 2 properties, one on one side of me and the one between Lori and I on the other corner, had people come through their fences. One was a drunk driver, one we're not sure about. That same one between Lori and I, some other drunk driver just came through their fence again last week. This is both sides of me in the space of less than a year. So I think we need to be really, really careful about what, in the name of tasting, we let be consumed at these places, because I think we're going to have an ugly incident somewhere down the line. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Since Sue has mentioned my comment that I made to Mr. Rosasco, and I think all of you had a copy on it. By the way, I'm Carol Rubin. I live in Newcastle, probably 3 miles away from Lori and Sue. I wanted to congratulate George on what I think is a very even-handed approach to the winery ordinance over the first draft that we saw, especially with respect to events. But I really would like you to consider a provision which you're allowed in Business and Professional Code 223358, which is the one the vintners are citing, that allows them to serve alcohol at a tasting room by the glass or bottle. Consider placing a limit on that. I think everybody, the county and planning and even the vintners, have an interest in making sure that tasting rooms don't become perceived as neighborhood watering holes, especially in residential and farm zoning. And we all remember the recent very nasty situation with Goat House Brewery. I think by placing a reasonable limit, which would be 2 5-ounce servings per hour to a maximum of 1 750 ml bottle, that's about 5 servings per customer per day, would allow the vintners to have their customers sample the wine adequately. They can still buy as much as they want, as many cases as they want. They can go down the road and drink it. They just can't drink more than that on the premises. And this gives the proprietor an out, too, to a customer who may be hanging around a little too long and making them nervous. They can just point to the sign and say, sorry, our county code says that I can't serve you anymore. This is going to be especially important in farm and residential zoning, where a neighborhood tavern is a really undesirable use. So I'm really hoping that there can be some discussion on this and we can consider the provision. By the way, 2 glasses per hour, 2 5-ounce servings per hour is already enough to render a considerable portion of the population, including a female of my size, impaired under the drunk driving statutes. So I don't think the vintners want people leaving their establishments drunk any more than the rest of us do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi there. I'm Jeff Evans with Bear River Winery in Meadow Vista. I'd like to make 3 points, and the first one is about the boutique winery definition that's being added to this zoning amendment. They mentioned this case amount of 2,500 cases. I'm not sure if any of you have really internalized what that number really means. A winemaker gets about 50 cases per ton of wine. And so if you take 2,500 and divide it by 50, you end up with 50 tons. That's how many grapes we're talking about, 50 tons of grapes. Anything less than 50 tons, you would be considered a boutique winery. Well, you know, if you look at all the wineries in Placer County, there's probably only 2 or 3 that actually exceed that number. And if you look on the TTB's website, there's 29 permitted wineries in Placer County. So, you know, you're saying that most all of these people will not be allowed to have promotional events. I don't get that. The threshold is just really ridiculous. And, you know, you're allowing TOEs for these people, which means we could bring in hundreds of people. Like when we do the Grape Days of Summer, ticket sales are about 600. We could bring in 600 people for a TOE, you know, get a porta potty, get permission, pay the fee. But when I want to do a winemaker's dinner and have 28 people, I can't do it. You know, when I want to do a wine club release party with 30 people, I can't do it. That number just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and I don't think the county has really thought clearly about it. Anyway, that's my first point. My second point, I think I'm beginning to feel like a broken record because I've been saying this for over a year now. I came here in July of 2013 with the same message about resort zoning and the lack of this one spot being filled in with a C or CUP or MUP or ARP or something. When we went to go in 2009 to get our permit, business license rather, from the county, they told us no. I had to go get a letter of determination from Michael Johnson, which I'm going to give you a copy of. And in here, in this determination letter, I want to quote you directly what Michael Johnson, who's the top guy in the planning department, right, said. He said, in looking at the permitted uses within the res zoning district, a variety of retail service uses are permitted, including outdoor retail sales, restaurants and bars, retail stores, roadside stands for agricultural products, shopping centers, offices, and gasoline service stations. As noted above, some of these already permitted land uses within the res zoning district are more intensive in land use than the production of wine. Additionally, these same uses are allowed in other commercial zoning districts where the production of wine is also permitted. County staff could find no logic as to why the production of wine was not identified as a permitted use within the res zoning district. Here we are a year and a half later, and we have this latest version that's going out to the max, and these areas are still blank, even though right below it, wholesale and retail sale of wine and grape products is allowed on res. Wine tasting and retail sales of wine merchandise is allowed on res. Promotional events up to 6 per year is allowed on res. But I can't crush some grapes and ferment them because this table has not been filled in by the planning department to allow wine production on res. I just don't get it. Like I said, I'm feeling like a broken record. My third and last point that I'd like to talk about is this removing the functional equivalent clause that was in here for wineries. You were either required to have an acre of grapes And like George mentioned, the agricultural, commission would probably like to have that be some percentage. Or the ag commissioner could sign off for a functional equivalent if you were buying grapes from Placer County, from El Dorado County, from Nevada County. Well, this means that, a person who wants to build a winery, say, at the airport, where there's a gin distillery out there, but if I wanted to have a winery at the airport and I wanted to use a commercial building on commercial land at the airport in unincorporated Placer County, I would have to have an acre of grapes out there. I couldn't use the functional equivalent anymore. I couldn't just be a fermentation, / bottling plant on commercial land in the airport because they've removed this functional equivalent. And for me, the way I've internalized it, I have land that I can plant grapes on. It's $20,000 an acre to do it. But, if this is what becomes the rule, this means that I will likely not be buying grapes from any of the other growers that I have been buying from in Placer County, because I'll have to plant it on my property and I'll have to invest in that. And so the people that I have had contracts with for a number of years now, I'll say, sorry, can't buy from you anymore. Anyway, those are my 3 points. Thank you. You have a great day.
Thank you.
Can I respond to those, Mr. Stevenson?
Sure.
I actually agree with most of what Mr. Evans said. The boutique winery, it's not very clear in the ordinance, but it's not meant to force someone to be a boutique winery. It's meant to give them the opportunity to have a winery at a lesser level. However, if you only made 500 cases and you wanted to have events and you wanted to have winemaker dinners, you could fall under the small winery. So it's not meant to force people into the boutique winery section. It's only meant to give people the option of going in. Or you could go to the next step.
A boutique-sized winery could still qualify as a large or a small winery if they want to meet all the conditions of approval that go with those uses.
And it's not clear, and that's what I said earlier. That needs to be more clearly addressed in this ordinance. The second part about not allowing wineries in the resort zone district, again, Mr. Evans is right. Those need to be added because we did make an interpretation that wineries could take place in resort. We don't have very much resort zoning. I've looked it up as far as agricultural event centers and things. I think there's 6 or 7 pieces in the entire county zoned resort. Not a lot of it, but he is correct. It does need to be added. We do need to put that in just like we would in other zone districts to allow them to have small wineries, large wineries, boutique wineries. With regard to the functional equivalency, that's something that I've talked to the Ag Commissioner about. It's something that we can certainly look at as we move forward. We can talk to the Ag Commission about whether they think we should still have a functional equivalency or not. I would tell you that if you are strictly like you make wine or distill spirits in a commercial zone district, not going to need to grow an acre of grapes, and we can clear that up. I mean, if you go to like a food processing plant and set up a winery and you buy grapes from somewhere, that's a different use. That's not really a winery. That's more like food processing and that sort of thing. So that would be something that we can also address.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a different use. Okay, thanks, George.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else that would care to comment quickly? Seeing no one coming forward, then we'll defer any action here and refer it back to George, and I think...
So what I'm hopeful for today is that you have a comfort level with the ordinance that we can go out to the max for an action item. I think the things that we probably need to discuss, or at least discuss with the max, are tasting regulations. I can add a requirement for the posting about a hotline number and the property owner's number if they're having events. I'll clean up the language with regard to boutique wineries, and I'll also take care of the resort issue. And we can also talk about the functional equivalency issue. All relatively easy things to handle.
Okay. All right. Wayne, you have a question.
I have 2 things. 2 of the other comments that we heard, I want to get a response from you on that. One was on how many grapes are planted on an acre,
Mhm.
and if there should be a little better definition on that.
Mhm.
And the second was restriction of how much can be consumed on site. Do you have some thoughts on either one of those?
At this point, with regard to how many grapes can be planted on an acre, I frankly don't have any idea. What I would tell you is, right? Yeah, I would refer you to that commissioner who's actually here. I think there's some standard practice about spacing, and I guarantee you he's not going to go for 5 plants on an acre. It's just that's not going to be okay. So I'm sure that there's some standard
I turned that off.
equivalency that you would need to do to be considered an acre of grapes, but we can ask Commissioner Huntsinger, Agricultural Commissioner Huntsinger is here. With regard to the tasting, as we go through this, I'm open to any recommendations and things that we get. The reason we put it in by the bottle, by the glass, in conformance with state law, is because that is generally, when I say generally, not generally, I haven't found any other jurisdiction that does anything differently. That does not necessarily mean that we can't. It's just I went with what everyone else had. So as we go through the process, that's certainly something that I can address to the MAX and to the Agricultural Commission and see what the sense is. Do you want to limit it to like a bottle a day per person, 2 5-ounce, something like that? It's not an issue. I mean, I can take that forward.
I thought, at least for me, I thought it was kind of a valid point in that it gives actually the winery owner an out if somebody's sort of hanging out and drinking a little bit too much, they can say, can't do that.
Right. I'm happy to ask all those questions when we go back to the MAX and find out what the sense is and come back. Anything
Okay.
else?
Any other questions of George? If not, we'll...
Can I ask just one more point of, just a sec, Josh, one more point of clarification. So do you have a level of comfort with those things that we've talked about, that we can take this out as an action item and come back?
Sure.
Yes?
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
And this is Josh Huntsinger, the Agricultural Commissioner.
Hi, good morning. Josh Huntsinger, Placer County Agricultural Commissioner. I can answer the question on the planting density. I would strongly prefer that it not be specified, and the reason for that is there's a ton of variables. It's everything from the type of soil, the type of irrigation or lack thereof, the variety of grapes, the type of trellising system that the grower chooses to use. A lot of that stuff is based both on the personal preference of the grower, the goals for what type of production. Is it maximum tonnage? Is it maximum quality? Is it somewhere in between? There's a lot of different things. What kind of equipment do they want to use? Do they want to use all hand equipment, or do they want to be able to fit a tractor in between the rows? There's a whole lot of different variables. And so, I've been asked to do some of these. Hops was mentioned. I did do an analysis out there. And what I look for is I talk to the grower and I say, why did you reach this conclusion that this spacing of, if it's a 10 by 12 spacing on their planting, for instance, why did you reach that? Why is that what you decided to do? And they explain that to me. And then I go back and I research kind of what the standard industry practices are. If it's a range of 1,000 to 1,500 plants per acre and they're at 1,200 plants, I go, okay, that's within that range. If it's 800 plants, and I'm just making up numbers, this isn't anything standard, but if it's 800 plants, then we really need to look at why it's below that standard, and we'll talk about that and see if they have some valid reason. It's like, well, I don't have enough irrigation water, so I need to plant them a little wider spacing so that I can, that's all the water I have available. There's a lot of things that go into it like that. Obviously, if it's something ridiculous like 5 plants, that's of course not going to fly. But there's quite a bit that goes into each grower selecting a specified planting density, and so I would strongly prefer that that kind of be left up to a determination rather than a set number in the ordinance, if that's your pleasure.
I guess what my question would be, Josh, is it sounds like the existing ordinance and maybe the proposed ordinance gives you the discretion to evaluate if we have a valid planting regime?
The existing ordinance allows either 1 acre of planted grapes or a functional equivalency. And what happens in that case is somebody says, well, I want a winery, I don't have an acre of grapes on site, and so I'm
creating a functional equivalency by buying grapes from the region. And so they'll typically say, you know, I have a contract with so-and-so for 3 acres or 3 tons of grapes, and I have another contract with this entity over here for another 2 tons of grapes. You know, if you use an average of 3 tons per acre worth of production, then they more than, you know, their 5 tons they're buying more than exceeds that acre of functional equivalency. And so, you know, typically I'll go through that analysis if that makes sense, that, you know, okay, those are 2 local entities they're buying grapes from, so they are meeting that functional equivalency. The way the proposed ordinance would read, they actually would need an acre of grapes to be physically planted on the site of the winery. And so that's just as it sits today. That may or may not change depending on your direction.
So basically then, when this goes to the Ag Commission, then you'll probably look at this particular issue, and if there's some proposed wording that comes out of the commission, then that's what we'll see the next time.
Yeah, so my anticipation is that this draft ordinance would go to the Ag Commission next month. I believe it's December 8th. And my hope would be that they would submit a set of comments or recommendations to you for your consideration at the December 8th meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we could have a condition, just sign off by the Ag Commission that it meets the standard if we chose to. Okay.
Marshall Davis, vintner at Davis Dean Cellars, an owner in Lincoln. With regards to putting limits to certain things in your wording, you know, we're all responsible adults here. The state puts enough limits on us as it is. What's next? You're going to limit how many times they can go to the buffet, how many times they can use the restroom in an allotted time period. It's kind of ridiculous. So many limits. I mean, we're all responsible adults. We don't want anybody to drive home inebriated. And with respect to food processing, we are actually winemakers. We buy grapes. We make wine out of them. I don't have property that I have a vineyard planted on, but I have contracts with a lot of growers where I buy my grapes from. And we have to have the same licensing as if you were going to make your wine from your own grapes. So just with respect to that, that is winemaking. It's not food processing. So I wanted to make that statement. Thank you very much.
Okay, anyone else? I guess not. Thank you. We're back where we left off, and I think you've got your arms around.
I think I know exactly the issues that we need to talk about. I wrote them all down. We will go out to the max as an action item. I'll clean up those things we talked about, posting, the resort issues, make it clear with regard to the boutique winery that it's not meant to be restrictive. It's just meant to give people another option if they don't want to be a small winery or a large winery. I think I have everything else.
Well, I think when you go to the Ag Commission, you might offer them the opportunity to be the sign-off group for the 1 acre certification type thing.
Yeah, I will talk to them about that.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah. Okay, we'll conclude that item then. Thank you, George.
You bet.
We'll move on now to our next item. I had it turned off.
I know, I'm just kidding.
I don't know why. All right, let's take a 2-minute break for everyone to change seats. I gotta get a new phone. we'll, who turned it off?
Give you a chance to speak so everybody can hear it.
We're all helpful commissioners and chairman today, aren't we?
So anyway, we're going to now take the Boulder subdivision TSE residents in the appeal. EJ.
Alexander on behalf of Dr. Kelvin Say and Dr. Cindy Say. They're requesting approval of a subdivision map and conditional use permit modification to allow two things. To allow open fencing to be installed 10 feet from the westerly property line along Moss Lane, where 25 feet is currently required. And then also to allow an existing entry feature with 6-foot high walls to be located within the 35-foot front setback and partially within a private road and public utility easement. So the Boulder subdivision, this was one of the last pieces of Los Lagos that was developed. It's actually located on the west side of Auburn Folsom Road, which runs along here. It's a 17-lot subdivision, approved in 1999. Lot sizes average about 2.41 acres. The Say's residence, which is right up here, is just over 2 acres. There's one lone residence down here that is actually also included in this subdivision. And this access off of Auburn Folsom Road is Moss Lane, which runs right alongside the entire subdivision. Here's a more detailed view of the Say's property. This is located at 5758 Avenida Robles. And just to kind of explain the features on site, obviously there's a large single-family residence. There's a swimming pool that was recently constructed. A wetland preservation easement, which is kind of how we got started with all this, is located up in this area, the northwestern part of the property. Moss Lane, of course, you can see runs right along the rear of the property. There's an open space lot JJ, that is located down to the south of the property. And then access is provided by a cul-de-sac, Avenida Robles, and then this is the entry feature that was constructed, which is also a point of discussion today. So just to give you a little background, this all started with complaints filed from the neighbors about activity happening on site. County staff went out there originally in July of 2012. And this large wetland preservation easement area, at the time we went out there, it was being graded. The property owner had placed a pipe and fill dirt within that area. They've also removed all the wetland protection fencing in that area in the purpose of using that as part of their property. Also, there was some trees that were limbed. I think there were about 40 trees, or actually 22 trees were limbed. I think there were 40 limbs that came off those 22 trees. And then there were 7 trees that were actually removed. That was all done unauthorized. The conditions of approval require that the property owners get the approval of the Development Review Committee before they do any tree removal. A solid wood fence was also constructed.
Say EJ?
Yes.
Were those trees within the wetland preserve area?
There were 3 trees within the WPE that were removed. That's correct.
Okay. It's a little confusing if, when they built the house, they probably had to remove some trees. But
yeah, and this, I believe, the property owners moved in after this house had been constructed and was there. Before construction even took place, the wetland protection area fencing was already established, already installed, so those areas were clearly demarked on the site. And what I'm doing now is giving you kind of just the history of the site. What you're actually asked to consider today are 2 items regarding the fencing and the gate. But I think it's important that you understand all the history that has gone on out at this property, both for the applicant and those speaking in opposition. They also planted some redwood trees within the wetland preservation easement, which was not allowed. And back to the solid wood fencing. This was constructed next to the open space lot. The conditions of approval strictly prohibit that. And then they also prohibit solid wood fencing, within 30 feet of Moss Lane. So from the beginning, the county has been, in contact with the property owner. We sent 2 notice of violation letters, one in July of 2012, the second one in March 2013. The reason there was a gap between that time is the first time we sent notice, the property owner immediately contacted the county, and he had indicated to us that they didn't understand the rules and regulations regarding the WPE, and they had every intention to correct that and restore the wetland area. When we went out in March 2013, that did not happen. Code enforcement then was involved. They sent a notice to the property owner in April of 2013, and then the district attorney actually got involved and filed a civil complaint in August of 2013. So since all that time, the property owner has submitted a wetland restoration plan to restore that area. That was just approved, a couple months ago, and my understanding is that they are out there now implementing that plan. Then they also applied for a subdivision map conditional use permit modification. Originally, they were going to ask for that WPE area to be removed, go through the subdivision modification process to do that. I believe they worked with the Army Corps of Engineers and did not have any success in getting any sort of wetland fill permit for that area. So what we're here today to do is correct 2 of the violations on site, because the other violations regarding the wetlands and tree removal is being handled by the district attorney and also our code enforcement office. So the first thing we're going to look at is fencing that's proposed. They're proposing a 6-foot high black tube metal fence to be installed 10 feet from the westerly property line, and that would run from lot JJ down to the south and run all the way up just short of the wetland preservation easement. This is kind of a bare site plan to see, but this is a WPE right here, and then the fence would end right in this area. And then there's a little depiction of the fence flat on top, just for wildlife protection, and it's kind of a black wrought iron.
E.J., could you go back to that map?
Yes, sir.
Okay, up at the upper end there where it says existing wooden fence, up top, the top.
So that-
there.
so-
No, the existing one that's running parallel to Moss, that one there that runs.
Okay, so that says existing split rail fence.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Now, it continues up into the other property there, and it lines up with the metal fence that the other property owner had put, the open metal fence up there. Where in relationship to that 25-foot setback are those 2? Because I have a little conflict there finding out if the other property owner encroached on the 35 or 25-foot also, because it appears that he did, or else I need those distances, I guess, identified for me.
Okay, so what I'll do when I get to the next slide is going to show pictures, and I'll explain.
Okay.
I'll explain somewhat right here. So the original conditions of approval and the understanding when the project got approved was that there would be a split rail fence installed 25 feet from the property line, and that would run the entire length along all the lots, even the open space lots along Moss Lane.
That's right.
So that was the original intention. So now when we go to the photos, what you have is, now this is a neighboring property. This is a property to the north, and if you could barely make it out, but you can see the split rail fence that still exists behind this black wrought iron fence. So what this neighbor did is that they constructed a open fence, it's almost identical to what the applicant is proposing, right next to that split rail fencing. which is allowed by the conditions of approval. All it said is open type fencing. So the county made the determination that that was consistent with the original approval. And so this is constructed 25 feet from the property line.
Okay.
So on the Say's residence, when they first began constructing the wood fence, this shows the fence posts that are on the property line. Mm-hmm. And then behind there is the original split rail fence that was set 25 feet back. And so that kind of shows you the distance where they moved it. And then down below on the bottom two slides, this is the solid wood fence as it exists today. And the applicant is proposing to remove that fence when they get the other fence constructed. And the timing of that is critical because they have a swimming pool, and of course they have to have safety fencing at all time. So this fence down here would eventually be removed. They are proposing to do a black kind of wrought iron fence 15 feet closer to the roadway from that split rail fence, which is different than what the neighbor did. They would be coming out another 15 feet. So that is the request that is before you today. As far as the entry feature, this is what they're asking for is an entry feature with 6-foot high stucco walls. There's pilasters, lighting. There's a mailbox in there, and they're asking that be located within the 35-foot front setback. Typically, walls maximum of height of 3 feet are allowed, so they exceed that. The other issue is this wall is located in a private road easement, which is owned by the HOA. The HOA has signed the application to permit this. It's also located within a utility easement, and so they would be required to abandon the public's interest in that utility easement as a condition of approval. Throughout the subdivision, there are other examples of entry features that have been constructed similar. This would not be out of character for that subdivision. The HOA has approved it, so the staff is in support of that request.
CJ, looks like just the pillars are 6 feet. Is that wall 6 feet high? It didn't look like it to me.
No, it's yeah. I'm not sure what the total. I know the pillars are 6 feet high, but yeah, those are. I mean, standing next to it, I'm over 6 foot, and they were well below me.
Okay.
EJ, how much into that 35-foot setback, or I'm really interested in the utility easement, does it go? Does it cover the whole utility easement?
Yeah, I don't know. Sharon, can you help me out here exactly? I'm not sure if we were exactly clear, but it's really close to the edge of right-of-way.
So two easements we're talking about that have public interest. So the MPE is on the shared front property line. The PUE covers the entire road easement. So they're probably about 10 feet into it when I look at the site plan. But we don't have the benefit of a survey, but it's at the edge of pavement.
But we don't have any issue with that being usually you have to go through an abandonment process because the utilities that might be in that or could be in that in the future have to say we don't need it anymore. Have we gotten that kind of approval?
No, that is a condition of approval, that they would go through the abandonment process to get that abandoned. So they would work with John Weber, and he would send letters out to the utilities to see if they would support that. The alternative would be that he would need to relocate any portion that's within that public easement.
Are those other pilasters we can see in that picture in the county right away then?
This is a private road and public
private
utility
road, okay.
easement. So there's public interest in the public utility easement as well as in the multi-purpose easement that is 12.5 feet back from the property line onto his property.
Does the county hold the title to the easements, the utility easements, or is there other agencies involved?
Well, the public utility easements as well as the MPE, the other utilities have interest in it, but the county is the keeper of it. So it was dedicated to the county, and we accepted them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, EJ, I'm sorry.
No problem. So with that, I'll get to what our recommendation is. We're asking that the commission make a finding that this project is categorically exempt from environmental review pursuant to CEQA. We're also asking you to approve this subdivision map conditional use permit modification to allow the open fencing on lot 11 to be installed 10 feet from the westerly property line, and also to allow the existing entry feature on lot 11 with a 6-foot high walls to be located within 35-foot front setback and partially within the road and utility easements. There's a number of other slides, just pictures of the site that I'll, are available to, the applicant and anybody speaking against. So I just want to make sure that they know there's other slides available that have pictures of the site.
Okay, thank you. Question?
Yes, in fact, from the time staff spent out there, first it was a wetland preservation easement that was disturbed, and then the solid wood fence went up along the back property line, and then I think during that time the entry walls were also being constructed. I know the Says were doing a lot of improvements all out there at once, and so it was just kind of a series of construction activities that, some of them that were unauthorized.
Okay, any other questions, EJ? Seeing none, I guess we'll let you off the hook now.
Thank you.
Okay, is the applicant and or their representative care to? Oh, okay.
Members of the Planning Commission, Nick Alexander on behalf of Doctors Kelvin and Cindy Say. On behalf of the property owners, we wish to extend our thanks to staff for assisting us in navigating some very confusing issues and arriving what we feel is a compromise. We are in agreement with the staff report and will accept the conditions of approval as proposed by staff, but we want to point out several items that resulted in otherwise a simple issue becoming very confusing. First of all is the pool permit issued by the building department. If you go to this thing that I have in your packet, we do wish the property owners believe they had approvals from both the Boulders HOA and the Placer County Building Department to construct a solid wood fence. As pointed out in the staff report, California law requires all pools to be secured by fencing. Examination of the plans approved for code compliance. If you notice in the yellow on this exhibit I gave you, it clearly states that it's a 6-foot wood fence at the location it was constructed in. And if you look to the right, this is a reduction of the copy of the stamped plans. So while we acknowledge it was later on identified as a mistake because of the conditions of approval, the property owners did feel that they had the appropriate authorization to construct a solid wood fence, and it wasn't until the complaints raised by the neighbors regarding the 15-year-old conditions of approval for the Boulder subdivision that the fencing and the structural setback issues were identified. Furthermore, had these issues been identified at building permit, it would have been noted that the fence would have been located approximately 5 feet from the edge of the spa and the pool, and that's the blue line is the 25-foot structural setback, and you can see it just perhaps clips the pool. And then due to privacy concerns of the property owners, just note that this home was went into foreclosure by the original builder and was a subject of squatters occupying the residence prior to the property owners purchasing the property, which is why they wanted the fence. The property owners may have elected prior to the issuance of the pool permit not either to relocate the pool elsewhere within the 2.4 acre lot or elect not to construct the pool at all. Therefore, given the confusion surrounding the issue, we strongly believe that the location of the fence at the 10-foot set 10 foot back from the property line is a fair compromise for all parties involved. Please note that the 25-foot structural setback is still valid, and no structures are proposed to be built in there. Next issue is the 6-foot tubular steel fencing. As pointed out on paragraph 4, page 4, paragraph 3 of the staff report, the proposal to locate the 6-foot tubular steel fencing is not out of character for the neighborhood. Page 4 of the staff report points out that there are several lots with different types of fencing at various setbacks within the Boulder subdivision and along Moss Lane. And in the pictures that I've included, the first one is along Moss Lane, and you can see the white fence is set several feet off the right-of-way. Second photo is another one with a black fence that we propose to match, which is set a couple feet off the right-of-way as well. And then the other one is the property to the north the type of material for the fence we're trying to match. Therefore, no new precedent will be set. Finally, the tubular steel fencing matches the property to the north and would meet the legal requirement of the state of California for pool fencing. Conversely, the installation of split rail fencing does not secure the pool and is inconsistent with California law. The driveway entry feature, as noted in the staff report, the Boulders project is a PUE and is permissible. The entry feature is permissible with a CUP modification. And also note this request is consistent with other properties within the Boulder subdivision and would not set a new precedent. With regard to the tree removal, the property owner felt that based on the tree ordinance, which allows a lot that will not be further subdivided and is under the control of a homeowner, not a developer like me, the ability to remove up to 50% of your trees on your lot without the need of a permit. And again, this was brought up as a result of the conditions of examining conditions of approval at a later time. But I believe staff has a copy of the arborist report, and the vast majority of those trees were 6 inches or less. There were only 7 trees that rose to the level of regulation, and they were mostly decayed. But that staff report is in the planning department's file. So anyway, in conclusion, as we previously mentioned, we're in agreement with the staff report and the conditions of approval. Tubular steel fencing, given the other property owners along Moss Lane have erected tubular steel fencing, no new precedent has been set, and as pointed out in the staff report, it's not out of character for the neighborhood. Furthermore, tubular steel fencing, it secures the pool and is consistent with California law. And with regard to the fence setback issue, given the confusion regarding the approval of the pool permit, we feel that the proposed setback of 10 feet from the property is appropriate and fair compromise for all parties involved. And the entry feature, the approval of the CUP for the entry feature does not set a new precedent and has already been done with the Boulder subdivision. We have Brian Nelson here representing the Boulders HOA board, and he will address the board. We also have Jim Bunce, who is the neighbor directly across Moss Lane from the Says, who would like to extend his support for what we're proposing. He's a gentleman that has to look at this every day. So anyway, we thank the commission for their attention to this matter and respectfully request you approve the recommendation as proposed by staff, and we would like to be able to have the opportunity to respond to any issues that were not addressed in the staff report.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. Is there questions of Nick at this time?
Well, let me see the map I have here. Excuse me. There was a question about the fence that was adjacent to, was it the open space JJ lot? It's a redwood fence too? Is that going to
Yeah,
be removed?
that is not on the property. Lot JJ is not part of this.
It's adjacent, isn't it?
It's adjacent, yes.
Yeah, and there's a redwood fence between this property and the open space lot?
Not that I know of. Well, I haven't looked at that.
The end part that comes back to the other split rail, it's the same as the 6-foot fence, the wooden fence. It turns in.
Right.
it turns in both.
I understand your question now. Yes.
Yes. So is that going to be removed, or is,
The split rail?
will that be removed?
No, it's not on our property.
The solid redwood fence
The solid wood fence would be removed, yes.
in its entirety?
Yes, in its entirety. Along, I just want to make that clear, along the length of the property.
And where it's adjacent to the open space lot, it'll be removed also?
That's
Is that correct?
fine. Yes.
Okay.
I have a question, if no one else does. Looking at your drawing, Nick, you've said several times that the pool has to be fenced for state law, and it appears where you highlighted the yellow line for the 6-foot fence does that on its own, because it comes out, goes down the property line, and then comes back to the house. So it is an enclosed
It is.
pool area. So then it would not necessarily mean that you'd have to have a fence along the street front because it's already enclosed. I don't know, maybe EJ could better answer this. You understand what I'm getting at?
That's where it's located. So they would have to move that back. They could still achieve, protective fencing for the pool outside of that easement area.
Okay,
I
that's, I
shouldn't say
understand.
easement area, but that 25-foot area.
That part's fine. All it does is move the yellow line further inboard.
That's correct.
But the result's the same. You've created a isolated area for the pool to meet the state law requirements at that point, so that the fence out on the street is no longer necessary to meet the state law. Is that right?
Yes, and that would be removed.
I guess one of the questions, looking at this, the one thing that's lacking on this is showing where the wrought iron fence would go.
Yeah, the wrought iron, yeah, true. The wrought iron fence would.
Add that, because
Yeah.
I think that's what sort of confused
Yeah,
me.
I think the blue line is 25 feet, the property line. I think if you draw it just a little about halfway in between the yellow and the blue line, that will be the answer. It would, halfway between the yellow and blue line would be 12 and a half feet.
Okay.
It would just be.
But wasn't there a comment made that along Moss Lane on the, I guess it would be I'm looking for the north mark on this. Oh, the north is here. So it would be on the southwest side. Isn't there going to be a steel tube fence proposed along there? Is that, am I misunderstanding it?
Yes. But not to replace the split rail fence, which is off the property. Lot JJ is not part of this property.
No, I understand that, but well, why don't you go ahead? Maybe I'm confusing it. I somehow had the idea that along on your map. Okay.
That's correct.
And maybe just show where the fence is going to go. Oh, okay, but how? And it's going to go and then around the whole property.
Yeah, up above here.
What?
Down to here, down to the edge of the property.
So right now on the site plan, they're showing. Does this?
What's confusing is that the
doesn't get up
plan
that far.
for the pool shows a redwood fence, but what was installed was not the redwood fence. It shows that the redwood fence was installed all the way along the back property line, except for where the split rail is, where the wetlands is.
That's true.
That's true. I think that's what you're trying to get to. This fence here showing here highlighted in yellow shows a 6-foot-high fence, basically doing the protection of a pool area that's required by state law. But it actually went from the lower corner all the way out to the edge of the property line.
And we're here to rectify that.
But are we going to have a split rail fence from, is a metal fence going to be where the yellow line is and just backed up a little bit and includes a pool, or is it going to go continue all the way down to lot JJ?
Metal fence is going to go from here up to there,
Up to-
around, up to the...
Okay, so it's not just going to enclose the pool area, it's going to enclose the whole back of the lot up to the wetland area?
Right.
Okay, so it's different, it's showing different on different plans, that's what's.
Now, this was the purposes of the original plan.
I know.
Yeah.
If I could jump in here just to clarify, and if you can see the laser pointer at the bottom of the lot.
Yeah.
So down here, that's open space lot JJ. So what they're proposing is 10 feet from the property line edge along Moss Lane. This 6-foot fence would come all the way up, and then they show it stopping short of the WPE, so it would stop right in this area.
Right.
The WPE line is right along here because this is all the WPE. So it would stop here, and then it would come up, and then eventually turn into a solid wood fence up there, I believe. There would be no split rail fencing
Right.
within that area, with exception they would have to replace the split rail fencing around the wetland preservation easement. So this area would all be in split rail fencing.
Was a split rail fence there already on Moss Lane side? On the wetland?
There is along the roadway right here.
Right.
But what they removed is a split rail fencing that goes well into the property,
Oh, I see.
marking
It's
that
around
area.
the whole area.
That's all been removed, and that has not been replaced yet.
Okay.
So this, back to lot JJ and maybe the adjoining owner next door in lot 10, it looks like. So this tubular steel is going to go all the way around the property?
For this lot, lot 11, it would just go along this property line, and it would end right here, as they're showing it.
So what kind of a fence is along the JJ?
So JJ is down south of the property. It's a split rail fence set back 25 feet, just like was originally approved with the subdivision. The property to the north, the split rail, as to my knowledge, the split rail fence remains, but they built right next to it the same type of black wrought iron fence, 25 feet from the property line. What they're asking for is they want to get, or have that fence 15 feet closer to the roadway.
Yeah, I guess I'm puzzling a little bit in terms of the state requirements that the pool be fenced. How what we're talking about here really accomplishes that?
It doesn't actually.
Doesn't have to?
No, it doesn't.
Well, yeah. Whatever they end up with, they're going to have an enclosed area, fenced area for the pool, wherever this fence ends up. It will return back and fence up to the house so that area is protected. So I'm not so certain that the issue is whether or not there's going to be protective fencing for the pool. They will have that either way.
EJ.
Okay, I understand that. I just, one of the rationales for this is to meet the rules for the pool. And so, if this exception, if it's not clear that we're meeting the rules for the pool, that's the only reason I'm asking.
Let me try and clarify something with regard to the pool. That's not the issue in front of this planning commission. What's in front of this planning commission is whether you will determine the modification to the subdivision setback requirements is appropriate. The pool fencing is dictated by state law, but can be, in fact, it's required to be enclosed. There are various ways that can be complied with, including alarm systems. So I don't want you to start getting confused with the notion that suddenly you have to approve the setback in order to meet state law requirements for enclosing a pool, okay? You need to look at the setback issue and whether that's appropriate.
Okay. I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions of the applicant? Thank you.
question for EJ, if I could, I guess maybe. A 6-foot wood fence in itself does not require a building permit, does it?
That's correct. So the original pool permit, excuse me, that was signed off. The copy that Mr. Alexander provided for you, which shows you the yellow fence. So that permit, that was a site plan submitted with the swimming pool permit.
So I understand that, but
it was only for the swimming pool, not for the fence.
The fence wouldn't have been part of the permit review or the plan check scrutiny at all.
That's correct.
Because it doesn't require a permit.
That's correct.
But it does require some permit to change the rule from what was approved in the original subdivision map. And that's what we're hearing.
Yeah, for the type and distance, the fence would be set back from the Moss Lane frontage.
Okay. Any other questions of staff at this time? If not, we'll move on to the public at large. If there is someone that's representing a large group of people and they agree with that representation, it would save us some time if you would all at some point nod and wave and say, yeah, we support
clapping.
his statements, and so we don't have to go through everyone saying the same thing. If we're their spokespersons, yeah.
I don't think there's going to be a lot of folks that are going to be waiting for the last representation, so which representation are we looking for?
I would assume you have a professional attorney type.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll be speaking for all the owners, so they're not all getting up and speaking today, but there are a number that have some very particular points to address some of the presentation items, since many of them have lived there for 30 and 40 years, that they can add something to the discussion. You're not going to hear the same thing over and over. I think there are, though, several of the residents of Moss Oaks that are going to have some discussion points that will help, hopefully, the commission in your deliberations.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Marcus LaDuca, 3200 Douglas Boulevard in Roseville, on behalf of nearly all the residents in the Moss Oaks subdivision. There's an old expression, where you stand depends on where you sit. Here, according to the staff report and the applicant, the request before you is really no big deal, just a minor request, or resulting from an unfamiliarity with the rules, or a lack of sophistication, or someone thought a mistake was made, or who knows what, or some combination of all these things. From the perspective of residents of the Moss Oaks neighborhood next door, the application before you goes to the very heart of this county's planning process. My letter to you last week seeks to summarize 2.5 years of blatant and intentional disregard and violations of federal and state law, county code, and planning documents, conditions of approval from this very commission, recorded easements, CC&Rs, and lastly, a judgment of the Placer County Superior Court. To summarize, over the past 2.5 years, and despite repeated county notices of violation and commencement of code enforcement proceedings by the county, as Mr. Rivaldi noted in his presentation, the Says have essentially thumbed their noses at the county and at a range of federal and state and local regulations and laws, including conditions of approval approved by this commission through the following actions. I'd like to highlight these if I could. Remove the permanent protective fencing along the rear lot line and a portion of Lot JJ and around the recorded wetland preservation easement on their property in violation of conditions 28.0 and condition 60. Cut oak trees greater than 6 inches diameter breast height and oak tree limbs over 6 inches wide in the wetland preservation easement in violation of the county tree ordinance. 3, constructed a solid fence on the property line, and my letter was mistaken. My letter said 10 feet from the property line. It was actually constructed on the property line, over 200 feet in length in violation of conditions 3 and 28V. 4, cleared vegetation and cut oak trees greater than 6 inches diameter breast height and oak tree limbs greater than 6 inches outside of their property on Moss Lane in violation of the county tree ordinance and the property rights of others. 5, sprayed herbicide on Moss Oaks subdivision property in violation of the rights of Moss Oaks residents. 6, utilized an illegal access route for trucks and construction workers onto Moss Lane over a recorded no access strip in violation of condition 8I. And 7, constructed a solid fence along a portion of open space lot JJ in violation of Condition 69. These are just the violations, most of which are continuing to this day, of the conditions of approval for the Boulder subdivision map that this commission approved in 1999. Those conditions were the result of very detailed negotiations between the developer of the Boulder subdivision and residents of Moss Oaks. They weren't just came out of thin air or standard conditions. They were carefully crafted 15 years ago. Those restrictions, among others, were in place for 13 years prior to the SAY's repeated actions violating those restrictions. In light of the staff recommendation, those many and repeated violations apparently just don't matter. Now let's get to the violation of laws and codes by the SAYs. Besides their violations of conditions of approval and recorded CC&Rs by their actions that I've just outlined and outlined in my letter, they have, by their illegal fill on the wetland preservation easement on their property, violated the Federal Clean Water Act regarding fill of wetlands, and violated recorded easements on the property. And to say that they didn't know, or didn't have knowledge of that, we've all owned homes. I've owned several. First home I bought had a sewer easement on the edge of my property. I couldn't put any structures in there, and I also was restricted the amount of trees that I could put in because there was a sewer line, and certain trees have invasive roots. So when you have a property, especially when you have an engineer out there surveying for various items for construction, you know exactly what easements are on your property. It's our understanding that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was not willing to issue an after-the-fact wetlands fill permit to the SAYs under Section 404 of the Federal Clean Water Act. So we have violations of federal law, violation of the Subdivision Map Act through blatant and intentional violation of a number of conditions of approval to the Boulders map, and violations of the county tree ordinance. However, like those commercials on TV that we see all the time, I have to add, but wait, there's more. The Placer County District Attorney brought a civil action against the SAYs for their numerous violations of conditions of approval in the Boulder subdivision map, and on August 2nd, 2013, a judgment was entered against the SAYs. My letter included that judgment, and I highlighted the key required corrective actions. I would particularly like to note the first action, submission of a revegetation plan to the county's Development Review Committee that was required to be submitted within 2 weeks from the entry of judgment, or August 16th, 2013. True to their refusal to comply with laws, codes, conditions, and recorded restrictions, the SAYs did not submit a revegetation plan to the county until April of 2014, in violation of Judge Alan Paneshi's order by nearly 8 months. So here we are. After 2.5 years of violations of federal and state law, county ordinances, subdivision conditions, CC&Rs, recorded easements, and a judgment of the Placer County Superior Court, the SAYs ask you to bless their actions, or at least excuse them, and basically say, no problem. If you agree with the SAYs, let's not kid ourselves. Let's not beat around the bush. You are setting a precedent that anyone in Placer County can point to in order to excuse their violations of laws, codes, restrictions, conditions, recorded documents, and even a court judgment. It's a precedent and a hole that you can drive a truck through. You might even have an issue with ever denying a similar future application anywhere in the county with similar violations if you approve the application before you. You have to make findings. They can't be arbitrary and capricious. And again, someone can point to your action here and say, well, they did it, why not me? I'd even go so far to state that if you were to approve this application, there's really no point in having code enforcement in this county. That saves the county money, but will undermine the county's ability to enforce its codes and approvals by this commission and the Board of Supervisors. Finally, as a land use attorney who's entered his 29th year of practicing law in this state and is entitled to roughly 300 projects, I have to say that this application goes to the very heart of the integrity of the county planning process. It's a process my clients and I and all other applicants before you have to follow if the planning process is to have any legitimacy for the public and applicants alike. If my client or any other builders or developers had committed even one or two of the violations committed by the SAYs, I'd expect the arm of government to come down very hard, and deservedly so. The principle that the SAYs' illegal actions expressed to you today is quite clear. Do whatever you want, plead ignorance or lack of sophistication, or you just didn't read something, and seek permission after the fact. We believe equal treatment before the law and due process for all requires the same standards for everyone, whether they be builder or developer or resident alike. Moreover, complying with the conditions of approval will not impose any hardships on the Says. The wall that's shown, there's a rock retaining wall, and it looks like it continues around the pool. That's not even built yet. As to the violations of the front yard setback, allowing the front wall to stand is, again, to reward the Says for the repeated, blatant, and intentional violations. We ask you to uphold this Commission's earlier approval and conditions of approval for the Boulder subdivision, uphold federal and state law, county code and planning documents, and the integrity of this county's planning process, and deny the application in its entirety. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions. There are a few residents that want to speak to address particular items that have been raised in either documents that have been submitted to you, the staff report, or the presentation today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Marcus. Anyone have questions for him?
I just have one question. You brought up something, Marcus, that you said that part of the 12-foot, or not 12, excuse me, the 6-foot wooden fence is built onto property JJ?
Yeah, it goes around. There's a piece of it that goes not onto JJ, it's on the edge. You have to have as you said, you have to have it's got to be 25 foot back, it's got to be open fencing.
Okay, it's okay, right on the property line then. Okay.
Correct.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Marcus. Anyone else care to comment then? Please come forward and give us your name and.
Yes, my name is David Stringham. My wife and I purchased a lot on Moss Lane in 1978 and built a house in 84 and 85, lived there ever since. Hope to live there for a lot longer. After hearing our attorney, which I hadn't heard all of what he was going to say, there really isn't a lot more to say that I have. It's just, yes, I went through the 1999. It was a longer process than that to approve the Boulders subdivision lots. There was a lot to it. They wanted to build a solid fence like they have around Los Lagos, concrete. But the developers were reasonable. They wanted access for lot number 1 to come off of Moss Lane rather than Auburn Folsom. I think the county wanted that too. And so we were able to, work out an agreement that was suitable for everyone. Put a low split rail fence back 25 feet from the property line that would look natural. You wouldn't even know it's there. They even went so far as to put holes in rocks so they could embed it in that line, not go around it. And since that time, everyone has lived with that regulation, and Moss Lane looks natural. To change it, to allow someone to have a variance, to gain a variance, because they want more land, or whatever reason it is, just doesn't seem to make any sense. There doesn't seem to be any compelling reason why the county should allow them to make a change. I'd like to just, because we don't want, everybody's not going to speak, we don't need to do that, just have everyone stand that's in support of it from Moss Lane so you know how many residents are involved here, how many people are behind this, even after 2.5 years of all this going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please come forward.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Nelson. I'm Dr. Kelvin Cindy's next door neighbor. I'm also a board member of the Boulders HOA. Sitting back there trying to figure out if I still know my neighbors after hearing all these things about them. I, as a next door neighbor, it was a disaster when they purchased the house. The house was in foreclosure. The yard was a fire hazard. I constantly, as a board member, threatened the bank that owned the property. And I had friends from CAL FIRE come over. The trees were just, I don't think any of those things were over 6 inches. I mean, it was just a massive fire hazard. We constantly called Placer Sheriff. There's people breaking in the house. I could see them smoking cigarettes. The officers went in with their guns drawn. The property was just, we had people on Moss Lane coming through the property and partying in the house before the redwood fence was up. I have twins that are 1 year old and a 4-year-old, and I was actually scared for our safety. The minute that fence went up, the wildlife went away. We had no more foxes, mountain lions outside our back door. We had 6.5 to 7 foot rattlesnakes, and it was just it was very concerning. And so since they've moved in, all that's gone away. They've done a terrific job. As a board member, Kelvin has been, I think, at the majority of the board meetings. He's been very forthright about what his intentions were, clearly defining what he would like to do, and the board approved his actions. So in listening to this, I'm just still trying to be calm here, but he's done a terrific job, and again, he has the board approval for all the things he's done. That's all I have to say. Any questions?
I have one question.
Sure.
Do you live adjacent? Do you have that wrought iron fence on the back of the property on Moss Land? Is that are you that?
No, I live next door.
On the other side.
Maybe if we can just switch. Keep going. Yeah, right next door with the pool, right up here.
Right there. Okay, you live on this side. You don't live on with the back. Your property doesn't back up to Moss then.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, another question.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's I'm hearing two deals. There's two complete separate subdivisions, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so with that cul-de-sac is the only one from the boulders that touches Moss Lane?
That is correct. Well, there's a property up here too, right?
The next one up, right there?
Correct, yes.
One,
So-
if I may.
There might be actually right down here too.
There's one residence in the north, the Say's residence. This is a large open space lot, part of the subdivision, of the Boulder subdivision, and then this lot is also in the Boulder subdivision, but it has access off of Moss Lane.
Oh, okay, because when I'm looking at it, I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing Moss's residence and then Boulder's residence.
Correct.
And I guess in my mind, the Boulder residence doesn't have any problem with the front part. So that's
whatsoever.
That's been
Clearly
approved by your board.
Correct.
Everything, the county's approved it, so it's dealing with the Moss. Now, all the other houses on the Moss Lane side, and I probably should have asked Marcus this earlier, the orientation of the houses are always towards Moss Lane.
Yeah.
When,
pretty much.
when I've driven through. So in other words, Moss Lane's backyards aren't facing Moss Lane. The front of the houses are.
Mm-hmm.
So their backyards are in the backside.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at this whole issue, I sort of see a problem that everybody'd get to. You have your backyard, and then all of a sudden you have the setbacks if you have a pool and you have to secure it and stuff. And if you're the neighbor across the way or living down the street or to the sides, and then the front of your house is facing the street, in your backyard, you've got your big backyard and stuff, and so I understand the conflict here.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I just wanted to sort of clarify that with,
Okay.
fellow
Okay, I have a question.
public.
Sure. Yeah, going around to the front of the house. On the cul-de-sac, at least it appeared to me that almost every residence there had a, what do you call them, a pilaster or pilaster?
Sure.
It was 6 feet tall.
Let's keep
And
going.
so basically, I guess those have all been approved by the homeowners association.
That is.
And so, which is counter to what the county's policy is within the easements. And so I guess what we're asking for here is a subdivision modification that brings everybody into conformance.
That's not correct.
No, it's just the.
Not exactly.
So the other lots would be out of conformance then, still.
That's
That have
correct.
pilasters are
That's
6 feet
probably
tall.
correct, yeah.
I would be making assumption at this point without looking at loss, but I would say yes.
Okay, I guess just the difficulty is for this lot, they're asking approval for the pilasters, but the other lots have them and they're not.
That's correct, yeah.
And we're talking about a 6-foot fence. I guess I'll need to ask later, but it looks like it's maybe 4 foot or 3.5 feet.
That's correct. I would say probably.
So it's just the pilasters we're talking about.
Probably a little over 4 feet.
Right.
4.5 at the most.
And the easements, there needs to be some work, but apparently the homeowners association have already agreed to give up their portion of the easement, which looks like all the front entrance on that probably violate that easement.
Again, without looking at the bylaws, I'd be making an assumption, but I mean, it makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could just clarify, Chairman, the request before you today for this subdivision map, conditional use permit modification, although it will would modify the conditions, it is specific to Lot 11, the one we're looking at.
So the other ones would stay non-conforming?
That's correct.
Okay. Has the county ever gone to the homeowners group and explained that they're making approvals of things that are inconsistent with the county ordinance?
No, we have not contacted the homeowners except when this application came in. We could not accept the application unless the homeowners association actually signed the application themselves to allow this.
Okay.
So by way of that, they would be aware of
okay.
What's located in the in the private road easement and utility easements.
Ken, you had a question?
Yeah, EJ, on that, I mean, the issue of the front came up because of the issue of the back. I mean, that's what precipitated.
That's correct.
The whole thing where when code enforcement went out, I mean, they went through everything with a fine-tooth comb.
That's correct. And when we go out and in the process of trying to correct a violation, doing whether it's a subdivision modification or a variance, if we notice something like this that is also out of code, we try to correct that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else care to come up?
Good morning. My name is James Thomas, and my wife and I have been residents on Moss Lane for 20 years. I've got a few points here, so I hope you'll bear with me. I would like to address and clarify several statements that were made in the staff recommendations and this hearing. On page 4, paragraph 3, I quote, "The applicant's proposal to locate a 6-foot-high black tube metal fence 10 foot from the property line of Moss Lane would not be out of character for the area, given that there are several lots with different fencing at various setbacks." Close quote. One of the most important issues with this statement does not take into account, is that approximately 80 feet of the open rail fencing will expose an area which is currently used as a gravel-covered storage lot for a boat, trailer, and various debris. It is obviously permanent and encompasses a very large area that will be very visually impactful, and makes it especially crucial that the current 25-foot setback be maintained. And you can probably see that area there. Referring again to the county's statement, in actuality, the only fencing setback along the Moss Lane Boulders boundary that has been violated is that of the Says. Lot 1 at the entrance of Moss Lane differs. But was part of the original agreement made between the Moss Oaks residents and the developer of the Boulders. It was agreed that Lot 1 would enjoy entry onto Moss Lane as opposed to Auburn Folsom Road for safety purposes. This entry was limited to Lot 1 only. As part of the negotiation for the remainder of Moss Lane to have the permanent split rail fence along Moss Lane placed at the 25-foot setback, and it was endorsed and recorded by the county. Although Lot 12 has replaced the split rail fence, or not replaced, but has the open rail fence behind the split rail at the required setback, the Moss Oaks residents did not dispute the placement of the fence in favor of good neighbor relations and because it was placed at the required 25-foot setback. The county's assertion is also somewhat misleading and incomplete, as it does not take into account that other than Lot 1, the remainder of the fencing along the Moss Lane Boulders boundary is all located at the 25-foot setback. The fencing on 2 parcels on the other side of the road at the entrance to Moss Lane was modified months after the Says built their fence. We are aware that at least one of the properties at the entrance of Moss Lane opposite Lot 1 were paying close attention to what was going on at the Say property and seeing no discernible response by the county, likely proceeded in kind. After speaking with the contractor at 5860 Moss Lane, we were informed that the fencing was placed close to the road only temporarily for construction purposes and would be removed or placed back in its correct position very soon. The fencing issue at 8300 Moss Court at the entrance of Moss Lane is being dealt with in a separate code enforcement action and has already been ruled against by the Commission. The fencing on the Moss Oaks homeowner side of the road cannot be used for comparison. The majority of the fencing along the side of the road is in character with a rural country feel. The majority of the fencing is either wire or corral-style fencing, low-lying, and located at the front entrance to homes and complies with requirements of the Moss Oaks community. The county also asserts in paragraph 2, page 4, I quote, "The area within the 25-foot fencing setback is heavily vegetated with oak trees and other native vegetation. Relocating the open-style fence 15 feet closer to Moss Lane should not impact the visual character of the area," close quote. What this paragraph fails to mention is that although the property bordering both ends of the Say property along Moss Lane are in fact heavily vegetated with oak trees and other native vegetation, the property along Moss Lane directly behind the Say property is precisely where the vegetation has been removed, with only limbed-up oak trees remaining. We respectfully request that the Commission uphold the 25-foot setback and protect the beauty of Moss Lane. And I'd just like to point out that the plot map is a little bit inaccurate and misleading. And if you look at the pictures of the original split rail fence in relation to where the pool sits, that split rail fence is where the new open rail fence should go at the 25-foot setback and leaves plenty of room between the fence and the pool. I think that's it. So thank you for your consideration.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Because I was going to ask it of staff later on, but since you brought up the split rail fence, the split rail fence at the wetlands area.
Right.
It's there that goes up and butts up against the taller wooden fence. Is that set back at 25 feet?
Yes.
And it's lined up with the other property to the north where that person.
Where the open rail fence is.
They put the wrought iron type fence right against the split rail fence.
Yeah.
And those all line up, because I went out there a couple of times, so I just want to make sure that fence was 25 feet. Because it's hard to tell from the edge of the road and what have you.
Yeah. The barbed wire fence is actually where the property line is.
Right.
The split rail sits 25 feet.
25 feet. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Rokichi, there's a photo of just what you're talking about right now. That's the split rail fence, 25 feet.
And you can see the barbed wire fence in the foreground there.
Right. Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah. And then could you pull up that pool picture The one that shows the setback between the split rail and the swimming pool.
Bear with me. This
There's
photo up there.
A better one than that, but you can kind of see that it's quite a distance. So moving the fence back to its original 25-foot location would not create a problem. The pool was built before the split rail was even taken out. And we have notified the SAYS and the HOA since the very beginning of this construction. It wasn't new to them. Multiple neighbors have contacted them and talked with them to no avail. So this is not something they didn't know about.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, briefly?
Hi, my name is Beth Post. I moved to 5290 Moss Lane in February. Actually, we closed escrow in February 2013. When we came to see the property in January of 2013, it had been after a 3.5-year search for the right property for my family, my daughter, my husband, and I, to move up out of the flat, dry, brown Davis area into the beautiful hills up here. We've been steered away from Placer County because of the I-80 corridor costs and because of the incredible development that had been happening during the times in the 90s, 2000, 2010, and had looked for a long, long time in El Dorado. When I drove up Moss Lane in January, Martin Luther King Day of 2013, I had found where I'd been looking for 3.5 years, many, many homes. It was the drive up that was half of the bargain. That was a month before the gate, the large wooden fence went in. Imagine my surprise the day we closed escrow and drove back up and there was this big fence. Okay, it's going away, but there's going to be an open fence put in exactly the same area where that wooden fence is. There's a recommendation, or at least it's going to be just about as close. There's a recommendation that it won't change the character, but it will for me. I moved up because I want to ride my horse. Riding my horse with a 25-foot setback is a whole different thing than riding my horse with a 10-foot setback, especially if there are going to be animals charging that fence line. That's going to be dangerous for me and my daughter to ride our horses. So I would like you to consider the 25-foot setback, not only because we don't want to change precedent, we don't want to provide precedent, we want to honor the recommendations that were made for the 25-foot setback, but also because this directly impacts me as a resident. And it's also, somebody mentioned that, gee, the gentleman who wrote this letter, this one, that is opposite on Moss Lane, that's opposite the fence line, that, hey, he's the one that has to look at it every day. We all have to look at it every day. We all, every day. I can't get out onto Auburn Folsom without driving past that. And I certainly can't ride my horse along Moss Lane without being threatened by a 10-foot fence that a dog can charge, without having less room to get off of the road if a car comes by. And that's why I moved up there. So I'd like you to consider that.
Let me see if I can make just a quick comment. You were talking about riding a horse within the 25-foot setback?
On the road. I'm riding on the road.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm not crossing property. I mean, the only reason I would have to step into the 10-foot setback would be, if a car comes. And if a car comes, what I currently have now for my horse's sake is a visual space that my horse can safely move into. If the fence is right there, that can become problematic, especially if it's a fence with animals charging.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess
You have a
I have
question?
one question. The wood fence is currently at the property line?
Yes, there's a barbed wire fence.
That's correct.
So there's probably, 20-foot setback from the roadway
Not quite.
to begin with?
10 or 15.
10, 15.
Okay, is there anyone else that would care to comment?
Hello. Good morning. My name is Jim Bunsley, and I'm one of the Moss Oaks residents. I'm the gentleman that she just referred to. I live right across the street from the Sayers. And I've been there during the time that they constructed that house, or the house was being constructed, and before. And the lot was overgrown. It was ugly. It was a constant burden to look at from my point of view, and I see it every day. Both my front door faces kind of Moss Lane and my back door comes up. We have about 200, 250 feet of adjoining property line. When I look at what they've done, it's just an improvement. In fact, I personally would rather have the wood fence because I don't want to look into their backyard and see their kids swimming. I think that's a privacy that they are due, and it's not something I want to impose upon. But I'm in support of the recommendation to put the open rail fence, the open metal fence there at the 10-foot line. I don't see how this will impact anything or anybody going down Moss Lane. The lady talks about riding her horses. If you go down Moss Lane, you look at every fence on Moss Lane on our side, they're right on the road. And if you look at our CC&Rs, there's a 50-foot setback. There's not a single property that abides by that 50-foot setback in our CC&Rs. My fence is right on the line, right on the road. That's where it was when I bought it. Awan's right next to me, same thing, all the way around. So you're talking about a dog charging. If my dog charges the fence, it's going to be a whole lot worse than theirs, which is going to be roughly 25 feet off the edge of the road at this time. But I don't have any objection to the fence. I think it's been a definite improvement to the community, and I support their application.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else?
Good afternoon. My name is Chantal DeCaval. I live on Moss Lane, a bit further down the road. I am opposed to this change because when I moved in 1999, and I was, like Beth, very taken by the Moss Lane, and this is where I wanted to live. And when I learned that the parcel of land between Moss Lane and Auburn Folsom Road belonged to the Los Lagos development, I went to the Planning Commission and I asked them what was the plan for the fencing between those two developments. Was there going to be ever a wall-like fencing like Los Lagos has along Auburn Folsom Road? And I was assured that no, in no ways. There was a wooden split rail fencing that was to be permanent and set at a 25-foot setback. 13 years later, somebody moves in and decides to put his fence not only outside these 25 setbacks, but put a wall-style fencing. So this wall is going to go away finally after 2.5 years looking at it. But putting open rail fencing, which is a lesser evil, but putting it at a 10-foot setback is going to change the character of Moss Lane. I'm sure you have realized from listening to parties on both sides that there are two different people living in this area. We choose to live on Moss Lane because we wanted the open country feeling, because we are not afraid of rattlesnakes, and we don't need to be surrounded by walls to feel safe. There are other places you can live to feel that way. There are a lot of gated communities around, and you can build your fence and your wall around you. Moss Lane is not like that. The fencing on Moss Lane has nothing to do with beyond the Moss Oak residents and between the Moss Oak residents and people in the borders, because it is basically a boundary between two different type of developments. And we need this buffer zone. This 25 feet of nature, as much nature has been left there, we need it as a buffer between the way we want to live and the way these people want to live. We need this space, so we have a feeling that we get into Moss Lane, we are still in the open country. If you let them use this 15 feet by 200 feet of real estate, you are ready to give them away just because they want it, you know what's going to happen. You have seen their property from the sky. Most of it is either landscaped or built. You can go on Moss Lane, you can look at our properties, and that's true. Some fences are not within the 25 or 50-foot setback. But I have a tractor, I have two tractors. One I put inside my garage, the other one is outside. I have a big pile of wood, I have some equipment, some pipes left over. There's nothing visible from Moss Lane. There is nothing within hundreds of feet from my border, my property line. There's nothing you can see. If you let them use this corridor, this 15 by 200 or more feet corridor, you are going to bring the Los Lagos development right into our face. It's going to be right there. That's what they're going to use as a backyard to store their, leftovers from their building or their trailers and all the things. It's going to be right in our face. And I walk that street pretty much every day, and pretty much every day I look at it, and we are not happy about having, of course, it changes the feeling of the whole street to have these big houses and to have an open rail fence. Sometimes we think, okay, well, there was a wooden fence. At least we don't see the mess. And now we are going to see it, but I don't want the mess 10 feet from the street. I want it 25 feet. This is our front yard. That's their backyard. It's a very different issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I guess everything's about been said. My name is Ivan Holt. I live at 5465 Moss Lane, and I've lived there since 1980. I'd just like to point out to you that when it was negotiated, the 25-foot setback, it was to maintain our environment on Moss Lane. And the present people on Lot 11, they've moved in on us, and they haven't followed any rules, and they need to. I would admonish you to stick to the original thing that was negotiated, 25-foot setback, and that's the fairest thing. Give it in to them. What keeps the Lot 12 guy from coming along saying to the county, I'd like to move my fence out 15 feet. Well, that's a big chunk of ground. And it's already been pointed out, well, you can see the fence there, but they got a lot of junk along that fence. And we need to keep them off Moss Lane as much as we can to preserve our environment as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Julie Stringham, my husband David spoke, and this is for you, Jeffrey, because yes, we have been there for 30 years, and we had the privilege of knowing and loving your father, and he is at the base of this, because his love of Moss Lane and the rural experience that we all have is how we got here. And we are thankful every day as we drive Moss Lane, especially on the Mossa side where we don't see this fence, that your father loved this area so much. There was so much of it that goes back to him. And yes, we still miss him. So, thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kurt Hamburg. I've lived on Moss Lane also for about 20 years. I had really no intention of talking here today, but in listening to the Council for the Seas, I've been involved in this passively for the last 2.5 years, and it seems it's just been a series of double talk, and we didn't know about the wetlands, we didn't know about the fence, we didn't know we were supposed to do this, we didn't know we were supposed to do that, and when I look at these pictures, I don't know how you could not see the picture on the left where you can see the fence that's in place already and at where it's supposed to be, and claim ignorance by moving a brand new fence. I don't know how you can continue to avoid the wetlands issues, et cetera, et cetera. Then I was also listening, I was like, uh-oh, I can't believe that the council made a mistake and we have this swimming pool that got put in. But that was just another series of double talk, because the fence that they installed 25 feet out had nothing to do with the swimming pool, just another effort to confuse the issues. And the real issue is that they moved into the house. Granted, they've improved the house. Granted, that they got rid of the weeds that were growing up there. But I don't think that we should reward them for not following what they knew to be true in the beginning, and then all of a sudden turn around and say, here you go, you've got 200 feet more property line, and we're going to extend the fence back just because you want to. And I think it's clear that that will establish a precedence, and I think it would be a really, really bad move. And I think rewarding them for their actions would just be a mistake.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Oop.
I'm Dale Winchester. I live on Moss Lane, and my wife and I moved in there and built about 40 years ago. And so, like many have spoke, growing up in the country, my wife and I looked for over a year to find a place that had the rural setting. And it was a dirt road then. So we go in and look, and my wife says, this is where we need to be. This is it. We met Henry Moss. We walked a lot of the property, and his vision and what he wanted to do and what he's seen fit exactly what Penny and I wanted and what we've seen. And now, in the last 2.5 years, has dramatically changed. And so the phone calls and meetings and get-togethers of the Moss Lane homeowners and their heart for the area and what was getting changed. So some of us made calls to the Homeowners Association. We, well, it's out of our hands. We have not given them the okay to do what they're doing. I mean, they got goats down there eating everything up. They're in there right along Moss Lane, cutting limbs and trees. I mean, just right along the road, just opening it up. And I mentioned to the guy with the goats and the workers, I said, you guys can't be doing this. Is the owner home? I mean, you let them know this can't be doing this. And I just don't get it. You're way over the line. And so I talked to John Adair. I got a hold of the association that was handling it, John Adair, and there was Anthony, they call him Tony. Talked to them way back early, and voiced my opinion and talked to them. And said, well, it's really out of our hands. It's really the county. So then we start bringing it to the county and that. But it is, again, the agreement that we went in on back in '99 was very clear, and we worked through that, and it was done. It was agreed, and it was permanent, a 2-foot permanent fence. That's what it was to be. And these folks went in and just went amok, and they were well aware of that and change and the things they're doing. And I'm just asking that we uphold what we agreed on and was approved, that we stick with that. And it has, again, dramatically changed Moss Lane, and it needs to be reversed and get restored. And it's going to take years for that to get back to a natural setting that we all enjoyed for so many years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no one else coming forward, close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission for questions, answers, comments, motions.
Yeah, I guess one question is, 25 feet is kind of a no-do-anything zone. And so once they get beyond the 25 feet, what can they do? Like could they build a wood fence at 26 feet from the property line? Or what would be permissible there?
So the conditions are fairly specific about structural setbacks along Moss Lane, and no structures can be constructed any closer than 30 feet. So 30 feet, within that 30-foot area, you cannot build a structure. A fence, a 6-foot fence, 6 foot or under, is not considered a structure. But the condition also says no solid fencing within that area as well. So that's why they're proposing the wrought iron or open fencing. So could they utilize that area? They could utilize that area. They can landscape it. Anything short of building a structure there, they would be able to do.
Okay, so the tubular fence that we're talking about, if it's on the 25 foot, that wouldn't be considered a structure?
That's correct.
Okay. A 6-foot wood fence would be out, though, because it's specifically excluded.
Right, condition says no solid fencing along Moss.
So they could go back 30 feet and put in a wood fence if they wanted,
Right.
without a permit of any kind, okay?
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just for the, I have met with the applicant's representative. I've also met with Mr. Leduca. I've also met on site with some of the residents of Moss Lane and walked the area with them. So I wanted to disclose that. Wanted to also, I guess, kind of maybe try to break this up and simplify it in some ways, in my mind anyway, barring the other commissioners having issues with it. I don't hear any real objection or opposition to what's going on in the front of the subdivision with the driveway features and what have you. What I really hear the big issue is the type of the fence that's there and the location of the fence. What I'm hearing as I talk with some of the residents is that really if they go to the wrought iron with a solid cap rail and not pickets, that there's not a huge opposition to that if it's in the right location. So really what it boils down to in my mind here today, regardless of everything else that's on the plate, the contested issue here is the location of that fence.
And the type of construction.
Well, the wood fence, we've conceded is going, so the type of construction is the wrought iron, and I mean, that exists up and down in other locations. So my interpretation, and I hope I'm not wrong, but my interpretation from what I understand is that if that goes to that wrought iron fence, that could be lived with if it was installed at the proper setback.
I think you're right on.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to agree with you. Not only a tendency, but I am agreeing with you. But I'd like to also make a disclosure. I did meet with both Nick Alexander and Mr. Leduc on separate occasions, and I didn't know where Moss Lane was at all. In fact, I couldn't find it at first. I live in Roseville. How would I find it? But I did find it. I went out twice, and the other day, second time, I parked my little truck along there a couple of places, put on my blinkers, and I don't know if any of you saw me. I thought the police were going to call because I went up to a couple of the back fences over there and took a bunch of pictures with my cell phone and stuff. But when I first saw this, this whole process to me is troubling on a lot of issues, a lot of levels, and I think a lot of it has to do with code enforcement. You know, we've been not critical but concerned that we don't have enough code enforcement here, and rightly so, because we don't have the personnel. So here we have a code enforcement issue, which the staff has followed up on for over several years, had to go to court, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think we finally got down to a couple of issues besides the one he mentioned, and I think the wetland now issue is being resolved if they do what they're supposed to be doing. I have a kind of an issue in the front with the utility easement part of it, but I guess if it goes through the proper channels with the county and stuff. I know just from my own experience when I was on the city council in Roseville, a pool manufacturer decided to put a part of the pool inside, not the decking, but part of the pool in a 5-foot easement in the back of our property, and thank God we found out before it was gun-ited, but we made them move it, the rebar. So I'm kind of sensitive because utility easements are there for a reason. They're for the utilities. But again, if the utility companies can sign off that it's, you know, sometimes utility easements are put in and then they're not even used, I can handle that. But I believe the wooden fence on the back of the property and everything that's gone along that is critical, as Jeffrey pointed out. And because there has been a precedence of the adjacent property owner there with the wrought iron type fencing at the 25-foot setback in front of their split rail fence, I think it's I really think that's the appropriate place for it to be. All the other things were violations in their own right, but that one there I think needs to stay where it was originally worked out with the property owners during the 1999 negotiations. And I didn't know what the property looked like before present property owner bought that property, but I do admire the people cleaning up their property and taking care of it and making it better, obviously. But I don't think it's necessarily complete carte blanche to just do anything you want, especially if there's these agreements have been in place for a little while. So I agree with you, Jeffrey, on that. I can handle the front one. And I'm in agreement with you on the 25-foot setback with the wrought iron, if that's what the other commissioners would like.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else? Are you prepared to make a motion? Is that what you? Is there someone?
I was going to ask the T's or Nick if you're talking for them on the pool part. I mean, at the 25-foot setback, does it cross over pool equipment, or what?
Yes, it will. We'll have to move.
Yes. Some pool equipment would have to be moved.
Is there a shorter distance than the full length of the property that fence might make a jog that would make pool functional without running the full length and without going everything?
I think that could be reasonably done. Yeah,
in other words,
we can,
to
give a little, perhaps. I'm just throwing out an idea here.
Because this is what I. Came 25 feet and then just jogged out, came back there,
Yeah.
Dissatisfaction of staff, if that's the desire of the commission.
EJ, do you think that's something that staff can build into the permit authorization, that the fence be allowed to somewhat meander in order to just accomplish taking care of this?
Well, just that point.
Yeah, I'm not, just to point out this, and if I can get this laser pointer. So this, if you can see the laser pointer up there, this wall, to my knowledge, this is not constructed right now. That does not exist.
Yeah, so you just.
And I'm not certain where the pool equipment is. Maybe Mr. Alexander can point out the pool equipment, or what feature. I'm not positive what feature is in this area right now.
Well, couldn't the condition be worded to say that it intrudes the minimum amount into the wetland?
I'm going to disagree
Right.
completely with that assumption, and the simple fact that considering all the past experience with this kind of thing, for exceptions that they've made, that we make a hard and fast rule if we decide it doesn't meander, go straight just the way we uphold what's there. We're not making an exception for any part of the property or the pool. Just so you know where I stand on it.
Okay.
Hey, I have, the small map that we were looking at shows a real close, but when you look at the big map.
Not close.
It's not clear that this 25-foot setback would impact any part of the pool.
Correct.
On the big map, if you draw the line across from.
Yeah, well, the big map's a lot more accurate.
Well, that's why
Than the swimming pool.
that's why I keep asking the question on the small map. The big map is better, but the small map up there where the split rail fence is showing coming down to at the wetland area, then it shows the dotted line, which is back further than where supposedly the split rail fence is. That's why I keep asking if that split rail fence is up there, a little higher, right? The existing, up a little higher. Up a little higher, the one on the there, that one there in front of the wetland, if that's at 25. Because then you come down and the other line that shows that dotted line there shows the setback, or is that the 30-foot setback? What's that say down there? Oh, that's 30 foot. That's where I was getting confused.
I doubt.
Okay, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought that was a 25-foot setback. That's where I was getting confused on that one. Okay.
So if I could point out, this photo right here shows the split rail fencing, and then it shows, if you can see the white, and I have I guess a blow up in front of me, but all these white pipes here, here's part of your pool equipment that's right against the concrete wall, retaining wall, that's part of the pool. So all that is located behind this 25-foot fence.
So it's not an issue then?
I don't see it as an issue unless the applicant knows something that I don't. But what I'm showing here, and the blow up even appears to be, many feet behind that existing split rail fence.
Well, then don't make it an issue if we can avoid it.
Well, we've already heard that structures need to be beyond the 30-foot line too. So, we'd be talking about another infringement, I think, if the pool is built within the 30-foot.
I guess my point wasn't a huge section, but if there was a 10-foot section or something that needed to come in a couple of feet in order to avoid moving expensive equipment, I don't know that is huge. If it starts getting to be long section that wants to come in, I think that changes things big time. But
consider
if it's
expensive
just like jogging around a tree or a rock or something.
Yeah, what do you consider expensive equipment? Some guys, 3-foot pavement around the pool, or what?
It's all expensive anymore. But
Yeah,
I like
I mean.
to say,
All infringement.
I don't know the details. I'm just saying if it were needed to accommodate what's in existence to deal with a minimal section and a minimal intrusion.
It doesn't look like
I think there's too much
the
subjective
big map
positioning.
doesn't show that it needs that.
That I wouldn't have a lot of heartbreak in that, but it would have to be minimal.
I think it's a moot point. I don't think anything expensive has to be moved.
Shows that it's not even hitting the apron.
Uh-huh.
That's a picture of the split rail, 25 feet, and you can see how far back the equipment is. It's quite a ways back.
What is that distance?
I don't know, but it's more than 5 feet. If you're worried about the 30-foot, but it's well behind the 25 feet. This is a issue that it really has no bearing to what the facts are.
Is the pool on the other side?
But the question was the pool equipment had to be moved.
If the commission would look at you have in your packet on page 6, the most recent site plan.
Yeah, right.
And there is a 30-foot setback line. It's a dashed line near where this proposed whatever rock wall this is. The pool is considered a structure. It must remain within the 30-foot setback. I think what you've seen in received testimony that whatever pool equipment there might be is beyond the 25-foot setback. I don't recommend the commission try and suddenly
Jog defense.
draw another line that potentially can't be enforced, that is not within the setbacks that have already been established for the pool. I recommend the commission either say yay or nay on this and not start to deviate the line. I think that becomes untenable.
Can I ask the staff a question? What's the 30-foot? That's the one I was confused with. What's BSBL? Is that what's that acronym stand for?
Structural setback line, I believe.
Special
Building structure.
Yeah, this
building
is the
setback.
applicant
That's a
prepared.
building setback line.
Yeah.
Well, the apron of the pool, which it looks like, well, there actually is a wall there, but anyway, okay, so there's no building going in there, so that's a 30-foot, but the 25-foot would actually miss everything according to that drawing.
Okay. Where are we?
Well, I make a motion that we deny the request.
In its
Split
entirety?
into two pieces?
No.
We have a front and a
Both.
back.
Deny both. My opinion is that it's an infringement on all the rest of the people who are following the rules. They knew the rules when they went in. And by giving them tacit approval, you've already talked about setting precedent. And even on the front, same thing. These other people are wrong. If you make them right, they'll say, well, we're not wrong because they got it. I think it's cheating the rest of the people, the citizens, out of what they passed 22 years ago or whatever it was.
Is there a second to the motion? Okay. I'll have to.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion if I could, please.
The motion died from lack of a second. Go ahead.
I recommend that we approve the subdivision map conditional use permit modification to allow open fencing on Lot 11 to be installed 25 feet from the westerly property line on Moss Lane, and to allow the existing entry feature on Lot 11 with 6-foot high walls to be located within the 35-foot setback and partially within the road and utility easement, subject to the findings and recommendations attached on E and F.
Okay, is there a second for that motion?
I second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Wait a minute, I confused somebody.
Okay, so the request was, what was being requested is to locate the fence 10 feet from the property line.
But that was not my motion.
Your motion was to allow it at 25 feet. At 25 feet, what you would be doing is denying the...
Well, we're allowing them to install the open fence.
Yes, so hear me out. So you would be denying the recommendation 10 feet from the property line. What would be allowed by right, which does not require a modification of the subdivision or conditional use permit, is the fence at the 25 feet. There's not any entitlement or map modification required for the 25 feet. So
including the type of construction of fence?
Well,
we're going from a rail fence to the metal fence?
Yeah, to do an open fence 25 feet from the property line, they can
It requires
go
no-
out there today
requires-
and build that fence without any
Requires no
requirement.
Okay.
You're just approving the front.
I guess that I make a motion that we deny the request for the westerly property line, but that we allow the existing entry feature with the 6-foot high walls to be located within the 35-foot setback and partially within a private road and utility easement, subject to the findings and recommendation conditions of approval and attachment E and F.
And before you vote, I need to clarify that you also included the CEQA exemption. in your
Absolutely.
motion.
The what?
You didn't hear me say that?
There's a CEQA exemption.
Okay, we have, who made the second?
I did.
Is that still
Still there.
okay? Any other questions or comments on staff or the motion's text? Seeing no one, roll call, please.
Mr. Gray?
No.
Mr. Nader is absent. Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Rakucci?
Yes.
Mr. Denayo?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes. Okay, the motion passes. There's an appeal period for those that choose to exercise it. It's 10 calendar days from today, and the fee is $546.
I can see it.
Paid,
It's in front of me, and it's not in front of you.
paid to the planning department and just outside. We thank you all for your comments and hope that this gets resolved as peacefully as possible. I do have a question for staff. I'm a little concerned that I thought I heard them say that on Moss Road that there was supposed to be a 50-foot setback or a 20-foot setback on the other side, and it was the whole street is in violation.
Good to see.
Maybe that'd be
Well, if the easement isn't required, sometimes you go in and ask for an abandonment.
We are adjourned.
That's what we're saying.